January 15th, 1943. Above the steaming jungles west of Guadalcanal, the morning sun cut through the towering cumulus walls like molten steel, casting long pillars of gold across a sky that had become one of the deadliest arenas on Earth. In the cockpit of a battered P-39 Airacobra, Lieutenant John Michaels of the 67th Fighter Squadron felt the familiar vibration of the Allison engine straining at altitude. His canopy was smeared with humidity, and the thick island heat crawled into every seam of his flight suit. Below him, the waters around Savo Island shimmered like glass. Above him, the danger was invisible. A warning crackled over the radio. "Bandits, Angels 18, coming fast." And Michaels knew instantly what it meant. Zeros. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had haunted the Solomon Islands campaign since the first days of the fighting. Agile, efficient, impossibly maneuverable. Its pilots danced through dogfights with a grace that made even veteran American pilots feel like they were fighting blindfolded. In 1942 and early 1943, the mathematics of air combat were grim. In the opening months, Zero pilots routinely outclimbed, outturned, and simply outfought most Allied aircraft. The Airacobra, the Wildcat, even the early P-40s, all struggled to keep pace with Japan's elite aviators. The statistics told the story with brutal clarity. In the first 6 months of the Solomons campaign, many U.S. squadrons suffered loss rates approaching 1:1 just to stay on the field. Some units fared worse. Aircraft attrition was constant, pilot fatigue relentless. Yet, American planners faced a far deeper problem than individual aircraft performance: range. The vast Pacific, the largest battlefield in human history, was a chessboard of water, stretching over distances no European front had ever imagined. Missions between islands were measured not in minutes, but in hours of flight over empty ocean. American fighters simply could not escort bombers to their targets or intercept incoming Japanese raids at decisive ranges. Japan's elite naval aviators operated from the sprawling network of bases at Rabaul, Buin, and Kahili, launching long-range missions with practiced precision. The result was a cruel pattern. Japanese strike packages appeared suddenly over Allied positions, conducted their attack, and vanished into the horizon long before most American fighters could even scramble. This was the problem that defined the Solomons. The U.S. had no fighter that could outrun, outclimb, and outrange the Zero at the same time. In January 1943, the P-38 Lightning was still a rumor to most pilots on Guadalcanal. Something big, something strange, something twin-engined. Many had heard the same dismissive comment repeated from captured Japanese pilots and radio chatter. Too heavy to dogfight, too slow in a turn, clumsy, no match for the Zero. Imperial Japanese Navy aviators believed the P-38 was a flying tractor. 2 engines, a long wingspan, and none of the nimble finesse of the lightweight Zero they had mastered in China and the early Pacific campaigns. And on paper, they weren't wrong about the Lightning's weight, but they were disastrously wrong about everything else. For now, however, pilots like Michaels were left with what they had: underpowered fighters, tired engines, and the thin hope that tactics alone might make up the difference. At 18,000 feet that morning, the Zeros came down like knives. Sun-glinting, pale green silhouettes fell into a perfect diving attack, the classic Zero opening move. Michaels rolled right, diving hard, but he could feel the Airacobra shaking as he pushed the limits of the airframe. A cannon shell exploded off his right wing. Another ripped through the tail. He heard the shout of another pilot. "Brake! Brake! They're everywhere!" And suddenly the American formation was a cloud of spiraling contrails, shattered metal, and screaming engines. Michaels dove for the deck, barely holding the aircraft together. He survived this time. But the fight was another brutal reminder of the unsolved equation. America needed something that could meet the zero on its own terms, or better yet, rewrite the terms entirely. As Michaels limped his damaged fighter back toward Henderson Field, the low-slung volcanic ridges rising through the mist, another aircraft, sleek, silver, and unlike anything seen in the Solomons, was already inbound. Twin engines, twin booms, one nose-mounted punch. The P-38 Lightning was about to change everything. When the first P-38 Lightnings arrived at Henderson Field, they rolled across the pierced steel planking like predators built for a different kind of hunt. Ground crews stopped what they were doing just to stare. Pilots approached the new aircraft with equal parts curiosity and skepticism. Two engines in a fighter was strange enough. But the Lightning wasn't just twin-engined. It was a radical reimagining of what a fighter could be. It had a distinctive twin-boom design, with the cockpit pod suspended between them, its sleek line stretching more than 49 feet from tip to tip. The tricycle landing gear gave it an aggressive forward tilt. Its turbo superchargers fed the Allison V-1710 engines, enabling the P-38 to maintain power at altitudes where most fighters gasped for air. To some, it looked futuristic. To others, it looked like a gamble. Among the skeptics were the very pilots who needed it most. Many U.S. aviators arriving from stateside training had logged time in single-engine fighters and felt uneasy transitioning to something so different, heavy, fast, technologically complex. But the sharpest criticism came not from Americans, but from their opponents. Japanese pilots had observed the P-38 during earlier operations in Alaska and the Aleutians, and the Imperial Navy's intelligence reports circulated a clear message. The Lightning is too heavy. It cannot turn. It is not a dogfighter. To pilots raised in a doctrine that worshipped maneuverability, tight turns, feather-light controls, and energy conservation, the P-38 looked like an aircraft designed in defiance of everything they valued. What they couldn't see was that the U.S. wasn't trying to outturn the Zero. They were designing a machine to outthink it. Behind the Lightning's design was Lockheed's brilliant engineer, Kelly Johnson, a man known for shattering expectations. Johnson recognized early that the future of air combat in the Pacific wouldn't be determined by tight spirals at low altitude, but by speed, climb rate, firepower, and above all, range. The distances of the Pacific demanded an aircraft that could escort bombers, intercept raids before they struck, and chase enemy formations that previously escaped with ease. Johnson's design philosophy reflected this strategic reality. Twin engines for safety over open ocean, turbo superchargers for exceptional high-altitude performance, what stopped. A concentrated nose-mounted armament, 4 50-caliber machine guns, and a 20mm Hispano cannon, capable of crushing an enemy fighter with a single burst. Exceptional dive speed, allowing it to disengage or attack with gravity as a weapon. Unprecedented range, up to 2,200 miles. With drop tanks, no single Japanese aircraft in 1943 could match all these attributes at once. But technology alone doesn't win wars. The Lightning needed the right pilots, and soon enough, it found them. Colonel Thomas "Tommy" Lynch of the 39th Fighter Squadron was among the first to master its strengths. A rugged, quiet Pennsylvanian, Lynch had survived the early dogfights over Papua, despite flying inferior aircraft. When he transitioned to the P-38, the effect was immediate. He realized that if he fought the Zero at its strengths, he would lose. But if he fought the Zero on the Lightning's terms, fast, high, diving from advantage, it was the Zero that was vulnerable. Other pilots reached the same conclusions. Richard Bong, Gerald Johnson, Charles McDonald, and Tommy Maguire. the men who would become the highest-scoring American aces of the war, all earned their reputations in P-38s. Their success was not accidental. The aircraft amplified every one of their tactical insights. By early 1943, as P-38 squadrons settled into regular combat operations, something remarkable began to happen. Japanese pilots, so accustomed to dictating the terms of engagement, began encountering enemy fighters that did not behave like Airacobras or P-40s. These new opponents didn't turn with them. They didn't linger at low altitude. They didn't bleed energy in mid-air wrestling matches. They struck like lightning, high, fast, sudden, and lethal. And for the first time since the early months of the Pacific War, Japanese naval aviators began radioing warnings that something dangerous had arrived. But the true demonstration of the Lightning's potential would come not in a chance dogfight, but in a meticulously planned mission, the kind no other fighter on Earth could have executed. The hunt for a single man, Admiral Yamamoto. On April 18, 1943, the war in the Pacific reached a moment that would echo across history. The U.S. had intercepted and decrypted a Japanese message detailing the inspection tour of Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. He planned to fly from Rabaul to Balale Island at 09:35 that morning. Killing Yamamoto would be a strategic and symbolic blow unlike any other. But the challenge was immense. The flight path was deep inside enemy territory. Japanese fighters would escort him. The distances involved were staggering, over 400 miles one way. No American fighter except one had the range to intercept him and return home. Only the P-38 Lightning could do it. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron was chosen to lead the mission. His pilots gathered around a map spread across a wooden table at Henderson Field as commanders explained the stakes. They would be flying a route so long and so precise that a wrong turn by even a few degrees could mean fuel starvation or missing the target entirely. The plan required them to fly low, barely above wave height, to avoid radar detection. Their path would zigzag across the open sea, finally intercepting Yamamoto at a precise moment, in a precise location, based solely on decrypted timing. The math had to be perfect. The timing had to be perfect. The aircraft had to be perfect. Mitchell handpicked 18 P-38s, each armed with drop tanks and tuned for maximum range. Before dawn, engines roared to life across Henderson Field as the twin Allisons coughed and then settled into a deep, rising hum. Ground crews tightened last bolts, checked ammo belts, and closed engine cowlings with a final metallic snap. At 07 ISO, the formation lifted into the humid Solomon Islands air and disappeared eastward over the horizon, flying just 50 feet above the ocean surface at times. Salt spray peppered their windshields. Every pilot knew that if they survived the interception, they would still have a 4-hour flight home. For nearly 2 hours, the P-38s skimmed across the sea, their long shadows rippling over the waves. Mitchell tracked the time to the second. As they neared Bougainville, the formation climbed sharply toward their attack altitude. Then Lieutenant Rex Barber spotted them. 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, gleaming in the morning sun, escorted by 6 Zero fighters. Bogies at 11 o'clock. Mitchell had calculated the interception down to less than a minute. The formation they saw was exactly where Yamamoto should be. The American pilots pushed throttles forward. The Lightning's twin engines howled as the aircraft surged into attack. Barber broke away with his flight and dove on the bombers. Zero escorts immediately banked to intercept, but the P-38s were already tearing through the sky at high speed. Barber closed on Yamamoto's bomber, tail code T1323, and fired. The concentrated firepower of the Lightning's nose guns hammered the Betty. Rounds punched through the fuselage and engine nacelles. Smoke billowed. Flames erupted along the wing route. The bomber rolled, dipped its nose, and plunged into the jungle below. Admiral Yamamoto, Japan's most respected strategist, was dead before his bodyguards could react. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Thomas Lanphier attacked the second bomber carrying Yamamoto's chief of staff. It too went down in flames. Japanese pilots were stunned, not by the loss of Yamamoto, though that shock was seismic, but by what had killed him. A fighter they had mocked, a fighter they had dismissed, a fighter they believed could never defeat well-escorted Japanese aircraft deep in their own territory. Yet the P-38 had outranged them, outclimbed them, outsped them, and outgunned them, on a mission so precise that even one miscalculation would have doomed it. This was the breakthrough, the moment that shattered the myth of zero invincibility. American pilots now had an aircraft that could hit the Japanese where they felt untouchable. And the Imperial Navy was now forced to confront a terrifying reality. They were no longer the hunters. They were being hunted. After the Yamamoto mission, the P-38 Lightning did not fade into legend. It became the backbone of the air campaign across the South Pacific. In New Guinea, where mountain peaks reached above 14,000 feet, and weather shifted from clear skies to violent storms in minutes. The Lightning's twin engines gave pilots confidence that no other fighter could match. If one engine was hit or failed, the aircraft could still limp home, something single-engine Japanese fighters could not hope to do. More importantly, the Lightning's arrival changed the tempo of combat. From mid-1943 onward, P-38 squadrons began hunting Japanese formations aggressively, using altitude, speed, and long-range tactics the enemy simply wasn't accustomed to facing. Japanese pilots who had spent years dominating slow, low-power American fighters now found themselves attacked by opponents who chose when the fight started and when it ended. One of the clearest examples came during the battles around Leh and Wewak. In August 1943, American intelligence identified the Japanese airfields at Wewak as the most heavily concentrated enemy aviation hub in the region. Hundreds of Zeros, Betty bombers, and fighter bombers were stationed there, Japan's main defensive line for northern New Guinea. But they were vulnerable. The 5th Air Force, led by General George Kenny, planned a series of massive raids against Wewak. To succeed, the bombers needed long-range escort fighters that could fight their way in and fight their way out. Only the P-38 could do it. On August 18th and 19th, swarms of Lightnings escorted medium bombers toward Wewak, sweeping ahead of the formations and diving into the unprepared Japanese defenses. The Lightning's concentrated firepower shredded aircraft on the ground and in the air. The Zeros that managed to take off attempted to climb into the attack, but were ambushed by P-38s already positioned above them. The results were devastating. Across the 2 days of raids, Japanese aviation at Wewak lost well over 100 aircraft destroyed, including many of their best remaining pilots. The Imperial Navy never recovered from the blow. From that point forward, Japan shifted to a defensive posture across the New Guinea and Solomons fronts. The psychological effect was equally significant. Japanese pilots, who long believed their turn-fighting skills made them unbeatable, now faced an opponent they could not engage on equal terms. They reported that the twin-engine American fighter could appear suddenly, climb almost vertically, and dive at speeds the Zero could not follow without structural failure. The Zero's Achilles heel, its fragile airframe in high-speed dives, became a death sentence against skilled Lightning pilots. By late 1943, the P-38 dominated the Southwest Pacific. America's leading aces, Richard Bong with 40 confirmed kills, Tommy Maguire with 38, Charles McDonald with 27, relied almost exclusively on the Lightning. Their success was not merely personal triumph, but the embodiment of a doctrinal shift. Air combat was no longer about turning the tightest circle. It was about energy, altitude, and speed. The P-38 made this doctrine reality. As Allied ground forces advanced along the northern coast of New Guinea, the Lightning provided relentless air cover. When the U.S. prepared to invade the Philippines in late 1944, P-38s swept ahead of Navy carrier groups, destroying Japanese aircraft before they could threaten the fleet. In campaign after campaign, from the Bismarck Sea to Biak, from Hollandia to Leyte, the Lightning repeatedly proved its worth. Even Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, one of the most respected pilots of the war, admitted that the P-38 was a formidable opponent. After barely surviving a mid-1942 encounter with early Lightnings, Sakai recorded, "It was very fast. I could not escape." By 1944, many Japanese pilots felt the same. The hunter had become the hunted. By the time World War II ended, the P-38 Lightning had left a legacy unmatched by any American fighter of the Pacific Campaign. It shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other U.S. Army Air Forces fighter in the theater. It carried America's greatest aces. It executed the most audacious intercept mission of the war, and it reshaped the very concept of air superiority. The Lightning's influence extended far beyond individual dogfights. It forced both sides to rethink air combat doctrine. For the United States, the P-38 proved that long-range fighters were not a luxury, but a strategic necessity. This insight would guide post-war designs like the P-51H, F-80 Shooting Star, and eventually the long-range interceptors of the Cold War. The idea that fighters needed reach, not just maneuverability, became foundational to American aviation strategy. For Japan, the Lightning's dominance highlighted fatal flaws in pre-war doctrine. The Zero had been designed for maneuverability above all else, sacrificing armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and high-speed structural integrity. Against the early war aircraft it faced in China and Southeast Asia, this doctrine worked. But against the P-38's modern approach, speed, power, firepower, altitude, it collapsed. For aviation history, the P-38 stands as one of the most innovative designs ever flown. 2 engines, turbo superchargers, nose-mounted armament, extraordinary range, record-breaking altitude performance. It was an aircraft ahead of its time, and yet perfectly suited for the war it was built to fight. When the war ended, many Lightning pilots reflected on their strange, angular aircraft, not with skepticism, but with affection. It had carried them across thousands of miles of ocean, through storms and enemy fire, home on one engine when the other failed, and back again into battles from which many never returned. The P-38 was more than a fighter. It was a lifeline. In the decades since, historians have debated whether the Lightning or the Mustang was the better aircraft. But in the Pacific, where distance ruled all, the Lightning's combination of range, power, and firepower made it irreplaceable. Even Japanese veterans came to respect it. Some of the same pilots who once mocked it later confessed that the Lightning was the only Allied fighter they genuinely feared. It arrived quietly. It was misunderstood at first glance. But once it learned to hunt, the Pacific was never the same. And for those who flew it, the memory of those long missions, sunrise takeoffs, salt-sprayed canopies, twin Allisons roaring, remains forever etched in the steel and sky of the Pacific War. If you'd like to explore more untold stories of WWII aviation, forgotten squadrons, unexpected innovations, and missions that changed history. Make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which weapon, aircraft, or battle you want to see next. There are thousands of stories still waiting to be told. Let's bring them back to life together.